This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Hi guys, this is Common Sense Generation, and I have with me an absolute expert in filmmaking, in history, and right now also in parenting, Patrick Ney. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
As I remember, you many years ago, but already making videos for every day of Warsaw Uprising. And you know so much about Polish history that even though you're British, I'm Polish, I feel like you know more about Polish history than I do. You put so much effort in actually learning about it. So my obvious question at the beginning is, because we cannot hide it, that I am Polish and you're British, but why you chose Poland?
Well, thank you, Maria, for inviting me. And I must clarify straight away, I'm actually Polish. So the President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, actually granted me Polish citizenship in 2020, which was one of the most extraordinary days and moments of my entire life. So I guess I could describe myself as being British Polish, but it didn't start there, you're right. I came to Poland formally to live on the 6th of October 2010. So it's going on now almost 14 years, and it's my home. It's where I've rebuilt my life, I guess you could say. It's where I've founded my family, done many exciting and interesting things, one of which is telling the story of Poland's history and its past and present. And it kind of started in Africa. So I was doing some projects in Sierra Leone after the civil war there, fell a bit sick, came back to London, and instead of going to the hospital, I ended up going to the pub. And by hook or by crook, I met a Polish girl there. So this is where my story of Poland starts, an African illness, and started to visit her, Joanna, great girl. We're still in touch. We're not together anymore. But I started to come to Poland and uncover. I mean, I thought it was, bears, potatoes, and grey, but like black and white country, like everybody always says. And I uncovered the color of the country, the beautiful hospitality of her parents, their history, which is rich and varied. I mean, anything that ever happens, it really happens in Poland. It's the crucible of Europe. And started to discover that, hey, this is a place that's going places. So when I moved there, everybody said to me, why would you want to live there? People don't ask that question anymore. People aren't, even Polish people aren't surprised that a foreigner would want to come and live there. Like, it used to be every conversation someone would say, like, you've come here to live? And, but like, yes, I've come here to live. They don't do that anymore. This place is going places. It's good to be here.
You're right that 14 years ago, the direction of, let's say, immigration was opposite. It was Polish people who were emigrating to UK. Right now, it is more popular that actually foreigners come here and they want to sort of live, especially a middle class, normal life here because of the safety very often and the high quality, at least of food. But talking about this, when you have an experience of 14 years life here and also a very immense, because you learned Polish language, so you have a Polish wife, you have a Polish citizenship, you've done a lot of work to actually do this work. And this is not an easy path because the language is also very difficult. But what are the biggest mental differences?
Between the UK and Poland?
Yes.
I'd say there's more similarities than differences. However, when it comes to the differences, for sure, it's my perception that Poles are kind of individual flyers. If you look at sport disciplines, Poles are better in the single person sports than they are in the team sports. I don't want to mention any Polish football results even.
Don't even mention.
We won't go there. But it's my perception that British people tend to work and function better as units and organizations. Now, then maybe that's because of the fact that British people play a lot of team sports. I don't see so much of that in Poland, even now in modern day Poland with my daughters. But as I say, I think there's more similarities than differences. And the similarities for me are more interesting is that there's a work culture and there's a kind of corporate culture which I perceive to be quite Anglo-Saxon in Poland. Like they do work hard in this country. It's one of the reasons why this country's got up from being, poor, impoverished, deprived into a global economy, not the biggest, but going up in the charts, which is pretty cool, is because of that work ethic as well. So that's the thing I admire the most. Poles are a lot more reserved at first contact. There's a certain look about what does this bleep want from me. Whereas on the contrast in Britain, I've just been there for 2 weeks. People are much more friendly. A lady in a shop was saying to me, love and darling and all this kind of thing. And you would never get that in Poland. But that doesn't mean they're less friendly. Once you understand the context, you actually realize that they're just as friendly as anyone else. They're human beings just like anyone else. And there's a lot of love in those Polish hearts, as anyone who's gone into someone's home will be able to tell you. You are literally treated like God there.
Definitely, when you're already in the house, that you are accepted. And we say, a guest in the house means God in the house. So
yes.
you're supposed to pamper him and treat him well. And if, at least for most people, when already invited, it means honest friendship, that you want to at least
yes.
have some stable relationship and not just being kind of because it's usual or because it's just our way of being, but you don't really mean this kindness.
Yes.
But as we were talking, but it's not that important for our conversation that we are based in Poland. But what is important is this contrast. It becomes more vivid and vivid that Polish streets are still safe right now. You can walk in Warsaw in the midnight. You can be a young lady just walking in the midnight and literally nothing happens to you. And you don't even have this in your mentality. It's when you're going on the street, you can have your phone outside.
Yes.
You can have your phone on the tube, and you're not thinking that it might be stolen. When all of my friends in UK right now are saying, whenever I want to check anything on my phone on the underground, I have to go to the wall, yep. Take it out there for a second, and then keep it back because they already done this mistake and their phones were stolen. Yeah. So what's going on? It's
I think people don't realize the epidemic of crime that's happening in the UK right now. And it's true, when you walk around Poland, you don't have any of that. So there were some criminals who've been arrested recently who were doing 20 phone thefts a day. I've just been in London myself, and the first thing I said to my wife was, if anyone tries to grab your phone, give it to them straight away, because you mess with these people, they're prepared to hurt you. Women, children, not a problem for them. And they all carry knives. So it is not something to joke about. And her reaction was, what? Because we live in Poland. That kind of stuff doesn't happen in this country, relatively speaking. And when you walk on the streets of Poland, you feel safe. My wife told me she's never been threatened or harassed by anyone. These are the kind of things we take for granted in this country. But you're right, Maria, to say right now, that's not a forever state. We need to guard that safety that we have. We need to cherish it because other people don't have it. And it's one of the reasons why I love living in this country. It's one of the reasons why people, when they come here, they're like, oh my God, this is so safe. It's unbelievably safe. The statistics show it and people's experience show it as well. When I go back to London, I see what's happening right now with crime in London. It's scary, it's disappointing, it's sad. And the other thing is, it's actually preventable. We know what to do to stop this from happening. But are we prepared to do it? One thing's for sure, I don't want Poland to lose the safety it has.
So is it a case of mentality? Is it a case of, because let's say, obviously, UK is such a well-developed country with so many extremely wonderful ways of managing the crowd, managing the society. So I don't want to criticize in this
Sure.
way, but it seems like it's a case of decision making. So certain decisions were made in order to accept this, that other values are more important than safety. Other values are, and those values seems like, of course, openness. Those values seems like accepting, on some hand, everyone, wanting some sort of freedom, but where...
Yeah, you've summarized it in quite a nice way. So I've worked in government. Every decision you ever make, and I didn't make any decisions, I was like a little dog's body, but I saw people making the decisions, has benefits and costs. And when I go back to the UK now, I go back as a foreigner, really. I mean, it's my home, and I love the UK, and I'll always be British. You cut me right down the middle, there'll be Britain inside me. But I do treat it a bit like a foreign country. And what I see is a socialist state. The UK, I think, is just a socialist state. You look at the tax burden. It's incredibly socialist, very, very high taxes, not great return on investment. Like no one believes the NHS is a good model. It consumes an enormous amount of the state budget, people's tax money going to it's basically a bottomless pit. Now, when it comes to crime, I mean, we're in this world now where we are treating the rights of criminals as more important than the rights of the victims. I know there's no easy answer to crime. I just literally had a conversation with someone who works supporting both perpetrators and victims to go through the criminal justice process. There's no easy answer. Behind every criminal and perpetrator, there's also a victim. They're victims of trauma, they're victims of neglect, they're victims of deprivation. And that is the trade-off of having an utterly open capitalist society. I went to Dubai last year, and on the way in the taxi, kind of got talking to the taxi driver about crime, and he goes, "There's no crime here." I'm like, what? I hadn't heard that about Dubai, and people know this, right? But I hadn't heard it. I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, no, you commit a crime here, you're gone. You disappear into the prison system, or you leave the country entirely. And I'm like, they can do that? And then he goes, yeah, there's no porn, they don't have porn on the internet. I'm like, what? They can do that? Like, yes, you could make that decision as a country. The West is characterized by open, democratic, liberal ideas, at least in America more so than in the UK right now, where you can be literally put in prison for almost 2 years for shouting at a police officer or even shouting at a police dog, which is quite an extraordinary thing to do. That's actually just happened. And the trade-off is that people do in the UK lead lives of complete deprivation. I mean, we can see this in the statistics, again, comparing like for like. The average Polish family is now coming up to the average income of the average UK family. I mean, that's just utterly unbelievable, right? We're talking about one of the world's richest countries. And yet many families, many areas of the UK have been left behind by rapid industrialization, by globalization, which I think we can all agree now ripped the guts out of working class people in the UK, in the US. It had a massive benefit, it was a net benefit for the economy, but these communities were left behind. And of course, and we could talk about this for hours, social identity, the role of religion, values, the mission that we all have as people. It's not that I think the UK has lost its way, but it is a post-imperial country which is still kind of struggling to find its way in the world and now sits between these two empires of the EU and the US and is basically now out on its own. And, again, if I was the victim of neglect, if I didn't have my father or if I'd been abused in my childhood, who knows when at 19, what kind of family I would want to go into. The person I spoke to said these gangs are families, that they give you the emotional and social and developmental needs that you have to be part of a community and a network. Plus they give you money, weapons, and excitement. And for a young man, that's really good. Like, just to emphasize, like if you're 19 years old, you're looking for that kind of adventure. So the answer is complex, it's multifaceted. But again, coming back to the idea of Poland, I come back here, I'm like, this place is calm, let's keep it this way.
So, but right now, Britain is on fire, and we see it to a similar thing which happened 2011. But what's the trigger of it? It's and lots of things, of course, appear on social media, and it seems like the fire, let's say, it's set down, but then it burns in different places. So, but what are people actually protesting against?
That's actually, Maria, I'm glad you asked that question, because it's one of the things that's annoyed me most about the narration around what's been happening in the UK. So as the time of recording, there's been a series of riots or demonstrations across the UK in different cities. And the ostensible reason that's been given by the press has been the tragic murder of 3 little girls in Southport. It's hard for me to speak about. Many of them were injured as well by a 17-year-old man. I would call him a man at 17. And the reason the press gave was there was misinformation online about the identity of this person. I don't think it might have been the spark that lit the fire, but it wasn't the tinder. There's an awful lot going on in these communities. I mean, we have to look again and look at what the UK's voted for. The UK has repeatedly voted for less immigration into the country, was promised that by the parties that won. So the Tory parties repeatedly promised to reduce migration. And yet migration has reached record levels, upwards of 750,000 net people into the UK, I believe in 2022 or 2023, by the Conservative Party that ostensibly is anti-immigration. It's not at all. they changed the rules and allowed more immigrants in. And in those particular communities, the sense of being left behind, lost and ignored has just grown and grown and grown. Now, those demonstrations and riots are absolutely indefensible. There's nothing to be defended about throwing things at the police, hurting other people, attacking anyone. There were those incidents. There are undoubtedly racists within that crowd. But what certain elements, especially if the ruling party right now, Keir Starmer, decided to do was to paint them all as, quote, far-right thugs. Far-right. I doubt, I'm not entirely sure where this mysterious far-right movement that they claim is in the UK. There's no organised party there. They talk about the EDL, the English Defence League. They don't exist. They were disbanded, I think, over 10 years ago. The collections of different people who turned up on those days in those places, protested about different things, like with every protest. Angry about the murder of these girls? Sure. Some of them are far right? Definitely. But for Labour or commentators to ignore the fact there's a very large number of people who feel very angry about the changes that are happening rapidly in the country. I'll say this, it's a sticking plaster. But it won't cure the wound. And we'll certainly see more situations like this. We'll certainly see the UK public voting for a party that will give them that option of having less immigration. And I understand that. You know, I witnessed the way the UK has changed since the 1990s. It's been very, very rapid. It's never really been agreed with the country that this should happen. It has a massive impact on especially the lower class or the working class people. Because it's at that level that these immigrants come in. I'm an immigrant myself, so I'm not going to say immigration is bad. That's not what I mean. But we shouldn't try and ignore the voices of those people who were at those protests and the people who supported them too.
Exactly, because what we very often don't forget that mass immigration, which comes from, let's say, Africa or Asia or Middle East, it affects mostly the working class.
Yes.
Because this is their communities, their street, their housing that there is somehow threatened, and they are already struggling. And especially in London, it is a hard place to live. They say when you take a tube and the Circle Line, and when you do this the whole round, then it's like smoking a packet of cigarettes. So because of the pollution. So and whenever you're going every day to work and you want to bring your kids to school, to primary school, then at least you want some sort of comforts that even when you're living in this social housing, in a, let's say, working class housing, at least you're somehow safe. And if you every day you are passing people who are selling drugs, or you're afraid of taking your phone out, you're afraid of putting some nice clothes. Because what I've heard, I have friends who rent a room in such housings, and they are saying, oh, I'm putting a jacket over my nice dress when I'm entering the building because I'm afraid I will be stopped. Or of course I'm hiding phones, or I'm hiding my purse, or I'm putting a hood on so just they don't see me. And this is not making such lives easier, when of course a upper middle class, they have their own apartments, or they stay in them, and they immigrants cannot afford buying one next door. So I don't know why, especially Labour government, but especially, let's say, Conservatives didn't deliver at all in this case. But they don't understand that if you want to support working class, you need to at least bring safety.
Well, that's one of the ironies of the UK. So the UK is in this slightly odd position that they have a quarter of the entire adult workforce out of work. 5.6 million adults in the UK right now are in some form of out-of-work benefit. And for some of them, they are genuinely sick, and the ability for the state to support them and people paying into that tax system, you know, like lifesaver. Some of them are disabled, some of them have long-term injuries. And of course, there are people with genuine mental health problems. But I know of people who are off work in the UK, having cars and housing provided for them, who are perfectly capable of work. I know them personally. And how long as a country can we go on in the UK with this model of allowing a large portion of our native-born, let's call them workforce, not to work, whilst importing people in order to keep our productivity up. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's necessarily a wise model. It certainly has an impact on the lower class as well. And what we've seen in the UK right now is to paint these people who are putting their hand up and saying, hey, enough, as far-right thugs. I think it's probably going to make the problem worse. But that's the downside of democracy, as we were talking about before we spoke, right? You know, like the downside is, as a politician, I'm thinking about what to do to win the next election, not what to do to make this country great again or have a different economic model, which is going to take 20, 30 years. No politician ever thinks 20, 30 years, which is why nuclear projects, which take 20, 30 years, never tend to happen in the UK and Poland.
Yeah. Agreed on this. So, but we were, of course, we were criticizing a lot UK right now, but just to pointing out, so what's was the origins of those problems? And I think the origins of the problem is the fact that we do put this value of openness, freedom, to such extent that it stopped creating the national state. Because I think there is a 80-20, yes, this is at least Pareto, but I'm not 100% sure, but how much people can be safely integrated to the society for the society not to lose their framework, for them to be accepted, but also for the others to, let's say, cope.
Yes.
And there is definitely a certain level when if you have too much, then the rest will start to riot and feel
the salt in the soup, as a famous British far-right person actually did say, Nick Griffin. I did my dissertation at university on the subject of the far right. It's always been a subject I've been interested in. Look, I'm an immigrant to Poland, so I can't sit here and say that immigration is bad. It's actually not. And if you take a very wide view of history, there's always been the migrations of people, including invasions of different forms. Peoples were moved from one part of the world to the other under the Roman Empire. You literally had entire communities, cities and towns going to another part on the emperor's bequest. His soldiers were planted in different areas, so they would have Romans there as well across all areas of Spain. The UK is a country of immigration. You know, you just fast forward to 2,000 years back, 2,500 years back, 3,000 years back. It's just waves of immigration into the UK. But you're absolutely right. There's a question of speed. There's definitely a question of culture as well. It's probably a bigger subject that we can cover in this short conversation we have today. But I would definitely question the assumption, and I think there is an assumption from some people that borders shouldn't exist. Okay, I get that. Like I can even be down with that. And at an individual level, I'm sure all of these different people who are coming to any country, and I'm sure they're individually nice, but the gross impact of these people, economically speaking, especially on those lower middle class people, is something that we shouldn't discount either. And in my opinion, a country should have a good conversation between leaders and people before it embarks on that. And the thing with the UK is it kind of happened by stealth. It was never agreed upon. And I remember traveling on the tube in London, going to work and hearing only Polish at a time when I didn't know any Polish person. I didn't particularly like any Polish person. It was disorientating. It was a little bit scary, actually. You know, 'cause you're not quite
absolutely,
sure what
I
people are saying.
couldn't.
You know, I've loved being part of the Bangladeshi culture in London. I've loved going abroad as well. I wouldn't want to deny anyone that particular privilege, but we have to get real here. If just a third of all the people from sub-Saharan Africa who want to come to Europe do come to Europe, we're talking about a completely different Europe, not one that we would recognize right now for cultural reasons, but just also for population reasons. Now, you also have this issue of depopulation. So one of these key arguments would be, well, you know, we're not having enough kids, so now we need to bring people in. I'm a firm believer in technology. With both climate change and depopulation, I think we'll be able to technologize our way out of both of those problems. And that's something as well. I mean, it also does come down to your political leanings, whether you tend to be more conservative, thinking about the past, or perhaps more liberal or socialist, and thinking about the future, and this idea that we are all one. I mean, you know, there's a common humanity to all of us for sure. But I love European culture. You know, I think European culture is outstandingly amazing, and I don't like the way that we just so flippantly dismiss it now. Western Judeo-Christian culture has been what's changed the world for the better and lifted people out of poverty all across the world, including in Africa. The technology that was built here was not on the backs of slaves. It was on the backs of Protestant and Catholic, working ethics, a culture of science and history. And that's not to denigrate, science of the Islamic world. It's also very interesting, or the beautiful culture of African cultures. But my God, we did some pretty impressive things, and we shouldn't dismiss that easily.
I fully agree. Just to wrap up this episode, so you're not going back to UK so far, and it seems like you want to stay in Poland. So why?
I love the UK, as I've said, and I'm glad and grateful to be British and Polish. But more than once when I've come back to Polish soil, I've touched the ground, just copying John Paul II, not that I would like to compare myself to him, because I'm so grateful to be here. Poland's my home. It's given me everything. It's where I rebuilt my life. It's where I became a man. I'm a father here. I have a little bit of grass. I've got my działko, my summer house here in Poland. It's my little piece of Polish heaven. I can't imagine living anywhere else. From time to time, I fantasize about Italy or the UK. The UK is beautiful. There's many places in the UK that are absolutely stunning. But my home and my heart are here.
Well, this was Patrick Ney in Common Sense Generation. I think I have nothing more to add, except that I thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible. This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense.